Alright, so let's have a closer look at the system in the System of Systems template. A system by the book is typically a bigger thing, like an aircraft system communicating with a ground control system, or a car system communicating with traffic lights. So typically we speak about System of Systems when we have independent systems which somehow interact with each other. But with that template, you can basically model anything which you want to structure. So also a system of interest, which is more like a product, or maybe smaller components. So you basically decide what a system is and what information you want to capture. Generally, it's also about where do you start to reuse something. So if it's something which has its own release cycle, which has its own versions which are reused somewhere else, then it may be interesting to create a system out of it. So in Polarion, that system is managed as a work item, and inside the work item we get all the details about the system, like here in the top menu, the subsystems. This little orange thing is a link to the release, because in this template we separate the documentation, which is the system work item, to the actual product, which is the release work item. So you can imagine that you have a documentation which is somehow final, but at the same time it could have several releases, like a patch where the documentation was not changed at all, but a little defect was fixed. And so we have maybe two releases linked to one system. That's the reason why this is actually split into two work item types. Then we have some additional meta information on top, like who is the author, who is responsible for the system, and all the stuff that you are already knowing. I think to start with a system work item, most interesting is that each system should have like a summary information, so that when somebody looks at the system, he knows, okay, that's what this system version is about. And most important are the documents. So the system is a container of documents which contain all the relevant information, like requirements, tests, risks. So all what makes up the documentation of your system is captured here in a document. And that's the whole paradigm, because when there are new system versions created, these documents are branched automatically. We'll see that in another video. So, but that allows us, that allows us to manage the documentation of different system versions in separate streams, we could say. So currently we are looking at the version 1.0 system documentation with the related documents. Clicking on one of the documents is the standard Polarion document what we see. There are little add-ons, however, like we always see to which system the document belongs. We see that here in the top of the document, but also on the right side we can see the system version and potentially other documents which are also of interest when you work in that system. So you don't have to leave the document to find other documents. They are already displayed here on the right side. Then there is additional information on the requirements as such. So when I click on a requirement, you can see here in the link section that this requirement has two links, a verification link to a test case and a subsystem requirement. Now you may wonder, why do we see that again? Because Polarion already out of the box displays the links. The idea of this system documents links is to filter the links and only show these objects which are relevant in the context you're currently working on. What is our context? The context is the example system, which has, in our example, two subsystems. So when I want to see links, I only want to see links to requirements which are either in the example system or in the operating system or in the admin app. and explicitly in version 1.0. I don't want to see any links to objects which are in version 1.1 or which are maybe reused in other projects. And so that filter allows me to only show these relevant links, because Polarion shows you all the links, which is correct, but in the context of the example system, I want to hide them. And that's the idea of having this additional link section here. To the parameters, there is another video. So for now, let's just keep in mind a system is a container of documents which can have links which are filtered by the context that you can set. Let's go back to the system again. Yes, so there is this, the system itself is contained in a Polarion project. And so typically you would probably want to have each system managed by a different team, having their system in a separate project with different access rights and so on. So the context actually gives you an additional logical layer on top of this. It just structures the systems from the different projects and groups them together. So what we see here, this example system, is like an additional view on these systems. And I can use that view to navigate, either like this or like this. And now when I click on this, the system is opened into the project where it belongs. And you see the operating system currently only has 2 documents. There is more in a system. You can see there is a lot of menus here on top. So let's not go too much into detail. I think most relevant is the documents. And when you click here, for example, on system requirements, you will only see requirements belonging to documents which are inside the system. Let's go back to our example system. Now, there are other work items like user stories, change requests, and objects you may decide, which are not part of a document. And maybe that's the last thing I would like to mention in that context. For sure, there are documents that you use just for planning activities, for implementing something. And there is a clear differentiation in the project in a sense that you only put in documents the work items that always represent the actual description of your product, of your system. And the other work items like change requests, defects are things that you plan, that you implement, and when you have implemented them, when you have resolved them, they are done. They are part of the release note that you have delivered that change, that you have delivered that user story, but they are not part of the document. Actually, what is part of the document is the change that you have performed, or the defect that you have fixed. So if a customer wants the button to become green, you change the requirement so that it describes now this is a green requirement or a green button. You resolve the change request and the release note contains changed button to green. So this is the difference, that these objects here, they are planned, but they are not part of the documents. And so and that's also the reason why you don't see here, for example, system requirements, system test cases. So in this menu here, to create new things, you only see objects that are not part of the documentation. Because whenever you want to add something as part of the system documentation, you would create a new document, you would add a document, and you would add the work items inside the document. So that's the paradigm. Anything that describes your system is part of the document. Anything that changes your system, which is planned and resolved, is a work item that is linked to a system. And we will have a look at that later on in other videos probably as well. Sorry for the long introduction, but I hope it gives you a general idea of how a system works in Polarion.